Hey Gwent community, this is my Devotion Precision Strike Guide. This is the season of the Mahakam. I'm Alpha Condor Echo on Twitch and the TheCondorHero in Gwent. This list is last revised on November 21st, 2020. So you can see here the list. Our win condition is to win round 1, bleed round 2, and play a short round 3 with your large gourd. This list contains 11 spell cards. 10 of them are natures to try to maximize gourd carryover. My typical gourd is 14. The list contains 4 Symbiosis units for a potential 6 Symbiosis procs per nature card. The list has excellent round 3 draws if you manage to play all 7 Thins before round 3. Some of the card choices: Oak serves as a great round 2 bleed finisher. Ida is a guaranteed pull for your early council, and Tex against defenders. This deck contains 38 potential damage points of removal for just enough control to not get smurfed on by heavy engine list. I recently added a Pyrotechnician for 1 tempering, which was inspired by Avadis of Team TLG, basically to give us a backup plan in case we don't draw Justice in round 1 and round 2. Some of the deck strengths is it has great consistency because of the number of Thins, it has a very strong bleed, and it has a good balance of non-tall points in removal, and obviously the great last play gourd finisher. So this is my results for the Season of the Cat. My overall record was 16, 6, and 1 with a 72.7% win rate. My peak MMR of the Season of the Cat was 2534. On the left here you can see specific matchups. Unfortunately I didn't get a chance to play any NR list on my climb. But over here you can see that my overall ST win percentage trying to work with some version of Precision Strike. On the right here you'll see some notable pilots who had a peak MMR. One of them was Coreflow, who reached 2600 for the first time. Van and Munter also achieved a high MMR at 2586. On this slide I want to explain the differences between my Precision Strike list compared to the 2 most popular meta lists on ladder right now. On the left here, you'll see the Non-Devotion Nature's Gift. In the middle, you'll see my list. And on the right, you will see the Non-Devotion Precision Strike list. So on the left here, you'll see the Symbiosis comparisons. With this list here, you technically have 3 from Leader because Leader persists in all 3 rounds. The Hammer Druids represent 2 Symbiosis units. Over here on the right, you'll see that Ithni could be anywhere between 1 and 3 Symbiosis units. You'll get 1 from Frexonet and 2 from Guardian. Now in terms of nature cards, it's relatively even. Both decks contain 10 nature cards. The deck on the left will naturally play 1 more nature card because of Shaping Nature, which will get played twice. But as you will see on my list, you'll probably play just as many nature cards because of the amount of thinning that is done. In terms of removal, the removal is pretty close. You'll get 15 from Rebuke, which also both decks have 15 value worth of Rebukes. 8 from Rock Slide for this list. On my list, you'll see 8 from Oak. Over here, they do have a Heat Wave, which is versatile tall removal, but my list will have 6 from Circle, 5 from Leader. Pavko is representing 2 points of removal per turn that it stays alive, and my list will have 4 from Guardians. In terms of the gourd sizes of both lists, potentially the gourd on the Non-Devotion Nature's Gift can be 18 if you played none of your units, but in reality, because you want to play your strongest cards, the average gourd size for this list is probably about 12.5, and this is done through my statistics over probably about 40 to 50 games playing a Non-Devotion Nature's Gift list. You can see here with my list, the average gourd size is typically larger because we play basically every card but 2 cards on our list. So that's why even though the max gourd is, smaller potentially, the actual average size gourd is a little bit larger for my list. Now this is the biggest difference between both lists. The Non-Devotion Nature's Gift list has 5 Thins but has 2 Unthins. So Thins are cards that you play and it removes or plays a card from your deck, therefore making it easier for you to draw all your other cards. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the Echo cards are Unthins. So in this list, Oneromancy and Shaping Nature represent 2 Unthins. So for example, Oniromancy will thin 2 cards, but it will unthin 1 card. So technically, Oniromancy is only a net thin of 1 card. Same thing, all the other tutor cards that you see here represent 1 thin. But you can see on my list, we have 7 total thins. So obviously you got 2 from Sentinel, you'll have 2 from Justice, and then all the tutor cards. So Consul, Farv, and Call of the Forest. So I'll show another slide and information about these 7 thins and why that is very crucial or important for my list. Alright, let's talk about the comparison between the two precision strike lists, devotion versus non-devotion. So you can see here that the non-devotion list has 0 Symbiotes units. So basically every nature card they play, they don't get the added benefit of playing for more points as the precision strike list. In terms of nature cards, they will run 6 of them, which don't really matter because they don't have any Symbiotes units, where my list has 10 total nature cards. Now, obviously, the non-devotion precision strike list does have a lot more removal. You'll see here that it has 15 from Rebuke, 8 from Rock Slide, 8 from Pyrotex, 6 from Circle, 5 from Leader, 1 from Heatwave, 1 from Garrett Professional, and 1 from Skags. So obviously these values would depend on how big the Skags is, or what targets Professional kills, or how many buffs ended up on Skags. You can see here that it has the most number of removal in comparison to ours over here. In terms of average gourd size, our gourds are averagely a little bit bigger than the average gourd over here, which is about somewhere between 12 and 13. We're not obviously counting direct buffs like for Agitator or things like that, but in terms of gourd's natural play value, it's about 12.5. Now, this list does thin a little bit better than the non-devotion nature's gift list, but as you can see, in terms of thins, my devotion precision strike list does have 1 more extra thin and 1 less unthin. This list has Oniromancy, which represents 1 net thin because of the fact that it unthins 1 card. So I want to talk a little bit about our macro strategy for this list. In round 1, you usually want to play between 7 and 10 cards. The goal is to win round 1 at all costs, with the exception of Ithni and Gourd. Those are the 2 cards that you really don't want to use unless you're winning on even or something along those lines. Another thing you want to do is get a good setup. You try to establish 2 Symbiotes cards, usually Frex and a Guardian. So I will show you that in a later slide. And you're going to try to save Oak for round 2 if possible. And you try not to use any thinning cards that are not guaranteed. So inside my list, Consul will pull Ida because she represents the only elf on the list, but don't try to high roll a Dryad in round 1 or high roll a Dwarf in round 1, because that usually ends up pretty bad. Now in round 2, we're going to try to play 3 to 5 cards. The goal is to try to fill up 1 whole row and then use Leader and get a full value Oak so that you don't give up card advantage and you're securing yourself last say and thinning your deck as much as possible. And ultimately, round 3 will be somewhere between 3 to 5 cards. You're going to try to play Ithni for those 3 Symbiotes engines, play your nature cards, and ultimately a Gourd finisher. So I made this rule up in a couple of months ago when I was presenting my imposter list or my lockdown list, but this rule is called the Rule of 16. And every time I develop a list, I try to obey this rule. And the goal is to try to play all your provisions. So in the vast majority of your games, roughly 95% or so, you're going to play only 16 cards, right? You draw 10 cards in round 1, you draw 3 cards in round 2, you draw 3 cards in round 3 for a total of 16 cards. And in those situations, you will only play 16 cards in that game. Now, obviously the exceptions are cards that make you draw extra cards like Mata and Isabel, but in the vast majority of our games, we only play 16 cards. So the rule of 16 basically says, put all of your excess provisions in these top 16 cards of your deck, right? So you can see here that I numbered the 14 cards that are going to be played, that I want to play every single game and take up all my excess provisions. So the lowest number of provisions a card can be is 4. Anything that takes 5 provisions or higher are using your excess provisions. You can see here that all my excess provisions are allocated to the 14 cards that I'm going to play and to any cards that are tutors. So for example, Farve, Council, and Call of the Forest. Now I didn't number these cards because ultimately cards like Farve and Council and Call of the Forest are going to be used to play one of the other 14 cards, right? So technically you're playing 2 cards that round, so I don't count it as against the 16 card total. And that's why I explained right here. Call of the Forest, Console, and Farve are cards that you play to ultimately play the card you tutor. So these 14 cards are the cards I ultimately will play. And obviously these 3 cards will increase my consistency of playing my top 14 cards. Now the cards in blue here are cards that are flexible, meaning that they don't really cost you anything if you play. So obviously you want to play all 4 of these. You want to play only 2 of these 4 cards. And those cards will depend on the matchup, the situation, but ultimately they don't cost you anything to play 2 of these cards. So I discussed why 7 Thins was very important for this list. The idea is that if you play 7 of your Thins before round 3, you get a perfect round 3 hand. So this is what I mean. If you thin your deck for a maximum of 7 cards before round 3, you will only have 5 cards left in deck for your round 3 draws, which means you'll be able to select the best 3 cards out of the remaining 5 cards. So if I only had 5 cards in my hand or in my deck by round 3, I get to draw 3 of them, I get to mulligan 2 cards away, so basically I will get to see every card I want inside my list. So the formula is, a deck starts out with 25 cards, you'll subtract the cards that you have played, minus the cards you have in hand, minus the cards that you thinned, and that will equal the remaining cards in your deck. So I gave an example here. Suppose that your deck is 25 cards, which it should be. If you played 12 cards in the game and you have 1 card left in hand, that's typical round 2, but I was able to achieve 7 thins before round 3. That means there are only 5 cards left in round 5 to draw from and to mulligan, which means I will get to select every single card I want to play. Now, the number cards in green are the 7 thins you want to play before round 3. So obviously you're going to try to use Call of the Forest before round 3. You're going to try to use Justice, which thins 2 cards. You try to use Console before round 3. You try to use Farve before round 3. And ultimately you want to Leader before round 3. So the 6th and 7th thinning cards are basically going to be used by using your final Leader charge. So obviously this requires some setup, but if you're able to achieve it, you will be able to play every card you want to play from your deck. So this is the ideal round 1. You want to play Frexanet with a TA on the Dryad that gets spawned. You want to use the Frexanet's buff on a Guardian that gives it 6 points of health, which usually helps it stay alive. On red coin, obviously you don't get to have the tactical advantage charge, but you still want to play Frexanet. You still want to buff up your Guardian. You still want to play your Guardians, and then you're going to play your nature cards and thins. Now here are some tips. Try to play at least 7 cards in round 1 before you pass, or you will have some roll capping issues and a potential long round 3. So I made this mistake a few times where my hand wasn't very good, so I passed a little bit early, and then when the opponent dry passed, I ended up having roll capping issues in a long round 3. So definitely try to avoid that. Try to play at least 7 cards so that roll capping doesn't become an issue for you in round 3. Now always try to plan out your caresses and Idas if you're so that you don't lose vitality value. So obviously you want to play your Ida first if you're playing if you're planning to play the whole round with as your 4th last card, and you'll try to play something like Caress as your 3rd last card for your caresses. You're going to try to save Oak, Justice, and Zoltan's Company for your round 2 bleed, but that's not always the case. But that's what your goal is, to try to win without those cards. Now, full leader is an option on red coin to win on even. I don't suggest you full leader unless it's about 1 or 2 cards left, so your 8th or 9th turn. Try to have, that's what you might consider using your full leader. Try to use Rebuke after you generated a Treant. Remember, Rebuke gives you 2 extra points if you have a Treant on board. So sometimes I will play a card like Tempering or Caress or a Circle so that I have 1 Treant on board, so that when I do ultimate use Rebuke, I'll get the 2 points and the Symbiosis procs. Now, don't ever buff Ithne with Frexonet because she will evolve and you will lose those 2 points when she evolves. So this is the ideal round 2. Your goal is to try to bleed out the opponent's, main combos and long round potential, maybe a scenario, maybe their best cards. The ultimate goal is to try to create a full row of units using your leader charge followed by a full value oak. So the length of the bleed will always depend on your macro strategy. That will be situational, depending on your opponent, depending on your hand. But that's up to you. But the goal of the bleed is to try to get a full value oak, and that being the last play, and forcing your opponent to react and be behind the ball. So this is the ideal bleed because it doesn't require or doesn't have random Symbiose procs. So you're basically not gonna roll cap yourself. You play Justice in the back row, which is 2 units. You'll play Zoltan's Company in the back row, which is 3 additional units for a total of 5. If you leader in the back row and get the leader proc, that's 3 extra units for a total of 8 units in the back row. Then you can play Oak back row, which guarantees you a full value Oak for the maximum amount without any random Symbiose procs. Now, that doesn't mean that, this is the only time you bleed. You can bleed with Symbiose as well. Okay, but the goal is to try to leader an Oak when you have a row with 5 units in it. So you're going to try to set up 5 units, like for example 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then you leader, which will bring you 3 more units, and then you're going to use your Oak for the maximum value. Now, there are situations where because you have Symbiose on the field, you will have the situation where you might accidentally roll cap yourself. So basically try to avoid that. So basically it's better sometimes to just take a 14-point Oak than risk roll capping at a bad time. So the ideal round 3 is to play Ithne and Guardians, followed by nature cards with Gourd as a last save finisher. You can see here I gave you guys a quick screenshot. You want to play Ithne, which represents 3 Symbiose engines, and you can see here that every single one of my nature cards are going to play for 3 extra points, assuming that these don't get removed, and 1 carry over onto Gourd. So if you, for example, take Tempering, which gives you 5 boost, that 5 boost would generate a 3 power token, which brings you up to 8, and also gives you 1 extra value of carryover onto your Gourd. So basically that Tempering plays for 9, that Rebuke can potentially play for 7 points plus 3 points, 10, and give 1 carry over to your Gourd, which is 11-point Rebuke. So the biggest trouble with this list is that there are a lot of bricks that you're going to have to try to fix, and my philosophy regarding this problem is to basically try to unbrick yourself throughout 3 rounds. So in round 1, my goal is to always draw my Justice. So I try to mulligan Volunteers first, and if you don't already have it in hand. Secondly, if you don't have Volunteers and you still don't have Justice, you're going to try to mulligan your Sentinels. I prefer not to sometimes to even mulligan my Dryads if I already have an unbricked Justice in hand. So there are some situations where you'll have a Dryad, you'll have a Sentinel in your hand, you'll have a Justice in your hand that's unbricked, and you don't want to risk your last mulligan because that might actually cause your Justice to brick, and you don't have that to use for full value in a round 1 that you might want to control. Now, obviously, you don't want to use Justice in round 2 if possible, but thinning it in round 1 is still a good option, right? So a lot of times you might need to use Justice to win the round, and the benefit to using Justice early is that you thin your deck down 2 extra cards and give yourself a much higher chance of drawing your golds. Now, when it goes to round 2, if you didn't draw Justice yet, prioritize your Sentinel mulligans. Try to get that leader out so that you can get 2 extra thins and fill up your board and give yourself a good Oak bleed. And this will also increases your chances of drawing Justice in round 3. So again, if you don't have Justice by round 2, prioritize mulliganing your Sentinels, and hopefully you will draw Justice. And thank you for viewing, guys, and good luck.